My name is Pete Rettler. I'm the campus dean here at Moraine Park Technical College. Welcome to Moraine Park's West Bend campus. So every February we do a lecture series, and sometimes we do fun ones, and sometimes we do ones that are a little bit more serious. This year we have one that's a little bit more serious. Last year was a lot of fun. It was on microbreweries. So this year it's on fentanyl. So a few years ago we did a series on the heroin highway, which was very well attended, and we thought that was the only issue. And then now, how many years later, now we're dealing with fentanyl. We partnered with Freighter and Aurora and Elevate and the health department and others to put together this series. So it's informative, and we're hoping you get something out of this and you leave here a lot more educated about what fentanyl is. I know I certainly am. I knew nothing, and Mary and the group probably got sick of all my dumb questions, but I'm guessing a lot of you have the same questions. So before we start, I'm going to invite Megan Lockwood up here, and Megan is with Public Health, correct? And she's going to show you how to do a pre-test, and then later on we'll do a post-test to see if they learned anything, right?
So exactly what Pete said, we want to do a pre-test to see what you know already about fentanyl, and then we're going to do a post-test to see what we learned from this series. So this is a QR code, so if you have a smartphone, you can pull it out, open up your camera, and then click on it, so like hold the camera up, and then it should scan, and then click on the website if we're all there. It's only 4 questions. It'll take about 2 seconds. If anyone has problems, you can let me know and I can help. I'll get out of the way.
So we are going to start out. Each presentation tonight is going to be about 20 minutes, and then we'll have questions. So we're going to start with Caitlin Henderson and Melanie Steffens. And Caitlin is a student at the Medical College of Wisconsin, and Melanie is with a group called Genoa. So they're going to talk tonight about what fentanyl is. So, Caitlin, here she comes.
All right, so my name is Melanie Steffens-Brock. I am a pharmacist over at Genoa Healthcare. So we are located inside of Washington County Mental Health, the facility. So normally we do a lot of work with unit dosing things for people who have mental health conditions. We also have a part of the clinic does drug rehabilitation, so they have therapies and medications that we give to help them kind of do the rehab and stop using the street drugs. So we do a lot of things every day with these different populations of mental health disorders. So tonight we're asked to talk about just what is fentanyl. So we're going to give more of like a medical feedback about it. So I am a pharmacist. I've been a pharmacist for like 16 years. I went to school in Illinois, and then I worked at a retail facility for many years, and now I've been the last 2 years over at Genoa. And then Caitlin's at the Medical College of Wisconsin, and she's my student, so she came here tonight and she also helped put together the whole presentation for us tonight. So basically fentanyl is synthetic, and they use it because it is more potent than morphine. So it is very strong, so you need very little of it, and you're going to use it for medical purposes. So it is 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin. So it's a very, very strong medication. You don't need a lot of it. So for completeness, we included the chemical structure. So when you talk about different type of opioids, you're going to have ones that you can find, like morphine and codeine. You can also have the synthetic versions that are compounded and made in laboratories, and that's where you get more options of different versions of opiates. So you're going to go from the things that are very strong. So you're going to have like a fentanyl, morphine, methadone. Oxycodone is pretty strong, and then hydrocodone is moderately strong. Codeine is going to be less strong, and so the FDA will, or a DEA will have it coded based off of how strong it is, like how controlled that medication is as well. So codeine would be easier to come by in the pharmacy than it would be to get some of the other ones that are stronger. So for fentanyl, it's going to work in the body because there's going to be these opioid receptors, and they're going to be located in multiple parts of the body, and that is how you get the pain relief. It also is going to trigger some of the reward behavior because you'll have some of that euphoria, and that would lead to the potential for abuse. You can also have a lot of sedation or confusion, drowsiness. It's going to have constipation, nausea, vomiting. The respiratory depression is also a big side effect of it, and that is just going to be where it's harder to breathe. You have much shallower breathing, and then it's going to lower the heart rate and blood pressure. So you can have it, fentanyl, in many different ways. So you can have it part of, if you're having surgery, the doctor can put it in your IV. You can have it if you're having cancer pains. They use it a lot of times for patches, or they have the lozenges, like a sucker you can suck on. Maybe you've just had a surgery, you can have some fentanyl afterwards as well. Those are more, medically used. The doctor would prescribe it. You have it inside of the hospital. So the sublingual tablets and sprays are going to be very hard to find. The lozenges are used mostly in people who have cancer for breakthrough pain. Nasal spray, it's probably only used for like surgeries. And then the injections would be used again for people who are having, you may have it like if you're having like a baby, like if they're going to have like an epidural, if you're having surgery. They use it because it's very easy to control. Or if you get a car accident and brought to the ER, they might give you some fentanyl to relieve that pain very quickly. The transdermal patches, that would be something that people would usually wear if they're having cancer treatments and they have a lot of pain. They're a patch that you can wear for 3 days. So the patches, they're going to distribute, and it's a very small amount, so they're going to have very small doses, like very small micrograms per hour in the patch. So very small amount is necessary to relieve pain. And then you wear the patch for 3 days, and then you would discard it. So these are about the lozenges. So those are, again, like, if you have somebody who has a hard time swallowing because they have a lot of like throat or neck pain, they can use those. Some of them look more like a sucker, but they would be something that you could suck on and get a very, again, these are small microgram amounts, but very little of it is necessary to get the pain relief. The sublingual tablets are very hard to come by. You would be very hard to find that in a pharmacy. The injections are what are used most often in hospitals. That's what they're going to give you if you come into the emergency department with some kind of trauma or surgeries, stuff like that. It's going to act very immediately. So these are just the amount, like the strengths that these things come in. So a lethal dose of fentanyl, I'm assuming this was for an adult-sized person. So like for an average adult person would be 2,000 micrograms or 2 milligrams. So very, very small amount can lead to a toxic level. So that's where some of the problem comes in. So, sometimes you can have children visiting a loved one who is being treated with cancer. If you're not safely disposing of your patches or these lozenges that have really good medical uses, they're going to take a lot less before they get to a toxic level. So if they, kids are very resourceful and they get into everything, so they might pull them out of the garbage and you wouldn't even know that they've been exposed and they could have had too much, especially if they start sucking on things. They always put things they're not supposed to in their mouths. So they can accidentally overdose the patches. They can, if they always tell you, like, after you're done with them, you should fold them sticky side in, so that way all of the drug is still sealed inside. But again, if a child picks it up, they can still get that absorbed through their skin if they're picking up the garbage with that stuff in there. So there's just a lot of easy ways, or if you are ingesting something that you don't know how much fentanyl's in there, very easy way to exceed the amount of fentanyl that would be safe. So I don't know if you guys have any questions about the pharmacy part.
If you have any questions, because we're recording this, we want you to do it on the mic, so just raise your hand and I'll come over.
So these are medical uses. So for me, it'd be very scary for me to go in a hospital and they say, hey, I'm gonna give you some fentanyl, because it seems like you would be easily addicted. Is it possible?
So, I mean, everybody has different types of rewards. So some people would have an easier time having an addiction from things than others. However, the amount that they give you in the hospital and for the short period of time, and usually when you are in a position where you are, maybe we're in a car accident and you have some trauma or you're having a surgery, you have other things on your mind that you're going to need that kind of pain relief in order to get through that event. You're probably very unlikely to have some kind of addiction unless you would go home with something and then keep taking it. That's usually when people would have that kind of happen, not for an acute thing where you're in the hospital for a brief amount of time.
So part of addiction, like there's the stories you hear, is that someone got in a car accident or injury or whatever, and doc sends them home with fentanyl or whatever kind of meds, and so they start taking it and they feel better. But then if they come off of it, they don't, or maybe in their mind they don't feel so good anymore, so they go back to doc and say, hey, I need some more. And then if doc says no, that's when we may start going down the bad road and getting it somewhere else, right?
I mean, that would be a potential for an abuse situation, correct? For an acute situation, most people are not going to experience that level. But if you are taking it more of a habit, that's why doctors, when I first started practicing pharmacy, would give a lot more. There was a lot more accessibility. They wanted to make sure patients didn't have any pain. It was one of their scores when they do the customer care, like how comfortable are you? So they would give people large quantities of medication. And so, like my parents, I'm always trying to convince them, like, you don't need this stuff from like 1995 anymore. Like, we can get rid of this. So, but like, they would give out a huge quantity, or you would go back to the doctor and they would keep giving you more because they wanted, that was part of making the medical customer happy and satisfied with their care. You don't see that now. It's much more difficult. Insurances don't want to cover it like that, and it's much more difficult for doctors because they don't want to risk having any type of investigation. So they don't give it out nearly as much as they used to because of those reasons, because people became so dependent on it.
Great. Other questions for Melanie?
It's more of just a statement kind of along that line. Can you just mention a little bit how pharmacists now report within that state system? So physicians and different people and pharmacists can see when people are getting them from different sources at the same time, too?
Sure. So it was actually one of my favorite tools. When I first became a pharmacist, many years ago, we used to have to kind of be a part-time detective. So we would have somebody come in and you would think, oh, perhaps they are not using this medication as prescribed appropriately. So you might call a different pharmacy and be like, oh, have you heard of Bob, Joe? Like, have you filled any narcotics for them? And they would say, oh, yeah, I just gave them 100 oxycodone yesterday. And you're like, oh, okay, we're not going to do this. Or people a lot of times would go to a dentist or call a dentist, and they'd want the dentist to call on something because everybody has tooth pain at some point. So dentists would always overprescribe because they wouldn't want to come in on a weekend to pull a tooth. So that was like a big problem, and we would always have to call around and see who was doing that. But a few years ago, the Wisconsin started to keep track of it in a database, which is a very useful tool. So pharmacists have access to it, physicians and prescribers have access to it, and law enforcement, I believe, has access to it. So it's super helpful because now I don't have to call multiple different pharmacies. I don't have to call many doctors because anytime I fill a prescription, it's going to log it on this database. Certain states will share their information, so like some of our local ones near us will share. And then it shows, so I can look up the person, it will show what doctor, what pharmacy, what drug was it, and how many tablets and how many days that's supposed to last them. So if somebody is seeking medications without having a good reason for it, if you go to the dentist, they can look it up. They can, if you get pulled over, the officer can look into that. Or it just makes it so much easier for me as a pharmacist to know that these medications are being prescribed with a good intent, not that somebody who is having seeking behaviors is getting medication that they shouldn't be getting.
All right. Any other questions for Melanie?
Hi, I'm Mike. And we deal with addicts on a weekly basis at Celebrate Recovery. And my question is, how do the addicts ingest it? Do they inject it, smoke it, mostly, or pills? And can you tell, is there a distinctive behavior when you're on fentanyl? Or is it just like heroin and OxyContin?
So I am talking about the medical uses. I'm going to let law enforcement, my friend over here in the sheriff's department, he's going to talk about what they do with it after somebody has obtained it legally, because that part I don't know. But I'm sure he's going to have a lot more information about what they're doing with it, because I don't know what the cool kids in the street do with that stuff. I wouldn't even know where to find it, because I'm sure it's everywhere, but I couldn't find it if I tried.
All right. Other questions? Or is this a great segue to the next presentation?
I have the boring part. I just have the medical part. It was the easy part. I'm sure his is going to be much more entertaining.
Okay.
You probably have some good stories.
I do, but it's a tough act because we never know what type of group we're going to have.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I already put him to sleep, so now you can get him entertained again.
Fair enough.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Melanie. Let's give her a hand. I neglected when I was thanking our partners. Moraine Park worked with Freighter, Aurora, Elevate, and the Washington Ozaki Health Departments when we put this series together. So once again, we have subs, hot chocolate, and coffee out in the lobby if you need some. And are we ready to go? We are ready. So this is Sergeant Chris Killey from the Washington County Sheriff's Department.
Well, good evening, and thank you for the invitation to come and meet with you guys this evening. As I mentioned before, we just never know what type of group we're going to get in one of these types of community engagement sessions, and obviously just kind of looking around and seeing and looking at some of the name tags and what some of the people have already said, I think we have a wonderful group here this evening, so I appreciate you all coming out and spending a little bit of your night with us. So yes, I'm Sergeant Chris Kelly, a detective sergeant actually. What that means is I oversee and supervise other detectives. Specifically, my role at the Sheriff's Office is as the supervisor for the Multi-Jurisdictional Drug Enforcement Group. Now that's very, very wordy. Oftentimes we're just called simply the Drug Unit. So here in Washington County, of course this has to happen. I guess my clicker went to sleep. In Washington County, we have what's called a multi-jurisdictional task force made up of a multitude of officers. So it's not just the Sheriff's Office. So while the Sheriff's Office provides a lot of the day-to-day oversight, the management supervision, and certainly the lion's share of the personnel in the unit, we also have individuals from the West Bend Police Department, Germantown Police Department, Kewaskum Police Department, and the Hartford Police Department that work with us in our office on a day-to-day basis, and we basically form a team. As a supervisor, these guys are wonderful. They work very, very well together, and we're certainly happy to have the manpower. Now, the other agencies in the county that aren't represented up there, they also provide assistance and resources. It's just that these agencies are the entities that provide us manpower. Do we have a fentanyl problem here in Washington County? Absolutely we do. Now, however, that isn't just the whole story. So as we heard from the last folks that kind of introduced you from the medical side of fentanyl, what we see on the streets is a whole different animal. And fentanyl is one of the drugs, one of the substances that makes up a category of drugs called narcotic analgesics. And as it was alluded to in the previous presentation, you have everything from natural opioids to synthetically produced opioids, and where fentanyl lies on that spectrum. So an individual who has an addiction or illicitly uses and abuses, say Vicodin or hydrocodone or oxycodone, those are all opiate in that same opiate family, and they can kind of substitute one or another to maintain that addiction or maintain that use. The downside, of course, as we heard from the pharmacist, is that fentanyl is significantly more potent than some of the other medications and drugs that are out there. So fentanyl is just one aspect of our opioid problem here in Washington County. We talk a little bit about where does it come from, or how did we get here? And over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a lot of different theories, different finger pointing. Was it the medical profession? Because suddenly we had pain tolerance was considered a vital sign. Just like your blood pressure and your body temperature and your respirations, the next thing the doctor would ask you, are you in pain? Do you feel pain? Rate your pain from 1 to 10 on a pain scale. We made pain part of a vital sign. And yes, doctors then were responsible for alleviating that pain. And then we went to, different types of scoring and things of that nature, and everybody wanted to perform well and to serve their patients well. Doctors don't want their patients to be in pain, so that part was worthy. And then we looked at our prescription, the amount of prescriptions that were being written, and what the quantities of those tablets were like. Keep in mind some of these, harder type prescription opiates, your oxycodones, your Percocets, things of that nature. Initially, when they first hit the market, they had relatively restrictive quantities that were allowed. And then that kind of exploded. Well, we also had insurance companies that said, well, we want to move things to mail order pharmacies. We want to go to 3-month prescriptions and 3-month filling of something that a patient's going to need or use on a daily basis. So we ended up getting these quantities of 90 tablets, 180 tablets, 60 tablets being filled at a single crack. And the insurance companies were more than happy to do that because in their minds, they were reducing the number of times and the number of charges, and there was some cost control to that. Obviously, we've since learned that because these types of medications were highly addictive and easily abused, that flooding the market with these large quantities was not such a good thing. And as time has moved forward, and as the last speaker said, nowadays you go into a doctor, and even when you have surgery and they release you, you're lucky if you walk out of there with 4, 5, 6, 10 tablets for pain management to get you through the first day or two. So we've come a long ways in that. One thing I think we often overlook when we talk about where the genesis of that pill addiction came from. No matter what kind of doctor you had, no matter what pharmacist you went to, no matter how you got that prescription pill filled, never on any of those labels and never in any of those instructions was the patient told to crush it and snort it. Never in any of those instructions was the patient told to crush that pill, dissolve it in water, and inject it. Never did it say to take 6, 8, 10, 12 of these tablets at a time. Those were all decisions, while they may have been fueled by an addiction, to place blame. We also have to look to some degree at ourselves. So where do we get to and why are we here today? So we had a lot of, I would say, narcotic pill-related addiction, narcotic pill use, and as manufacturers began to change and develop new ways for their pills. In other words, we had Purdue Pharma change the formulation of oxycodone to make it harder to crush it. If you try to crush some of these pills, it actually turns into like a jelly. So it's a lot harder to get them in a powdered form, which is very good. It makes it harder to abuse. The problem, though, is that didn't help the end users, booming addiction. And they had to satisfy that, not just a mental addiction, but what we know from narcotics, specifically your opiates, is a physical addiction, and they had to satisfy that somehow, or else they would become very, very ill and sick. And so that drove a lot of people into heroin. And why? Because heroin is just another narcotic opiate, just like the oxycodone or just like the Vicodin and so forth. So they were substituting that pill addiction with another drug, but it was in the same category, and they were able to avoid going through withdrawal, and they were able to, keep functioning. Now, as we move forward, a little bit about heroin is, obviously, it comes from your opium poppies, and it has to be refined in a process where the liquid and the fluid of the sacs is drained and ultimately refined and made into a powdered heroin product. You got to have a lot of acreage of opium poppies to make that happen. And we did have that. We had that overseas, primarily in the Afghanistan region was a huge region where they would have opium poppy fields like we have cornfields. And then there was a labor-intensive process to refine that and to prepare that and to ultimately convert that cash crop into heroin and then get it to overseas markets, primarily North America, the US, and parts of Europe, where it could be sold on the streets. Then, primarily here in North America, our fentanyl sources are from clandestine laboratories south of our southern border, as well as in Asia, as they figured out in a laboratory setting how to synthesize and compound and make fentanyl. And because it's in that same drug category, they said, well, we don't need to rely upon our compatriots in Afghanistan and overseas to source us with opium to refine into heroin when we can just have a laboratory in the middle of nowhere and make it ourselves. So what we see over the last about 4 years is the vast majority of our heroin supply on the streets is tainted with fentanyl. And in some cases, it's not just a little bit adulterated, it's 100% fentanyl in worst case scenarios. So the percentages of the concentrations, that's all going to be dependent upon where it was produced, when it was produced, what type of laboratory settings it was produced under. And anytime a drug is sold in quantities to other dealers, it gets, we call it getting stepped on, but it gets divvied up and more things get added to it so that they can change, say an ounce of product into 3 ounces of something they can sell. So the big question for our users at the street level now is it heroin or is it fentanyl? And the bottom line is, there really isn't any way to visually tell the difference. In fact, there isn't in most cases. Only through an analytical laboratory can the difference be identified. Now, there are some products out there, test strips that end users can utilize. However, most of our heroin supply has fentanyl in it, or at a very high concentration. But yet, we have a lot of people that don't want to use heroin. Maybe their addiction was to pills, and they went to the street level, and now suddenly they're able to source pills on the street. Well, the big problem that we have probably in about the last, I would say approximately 2 years, is most of those pharmaceutical pills that visually look the same as the Percocet or the oxycodone or the Vicodin pills that they were purchasing and that they were using before are actually clandestinely produced. They're counterfeit pills. Somebody has a press in their basement or where have you, and they're making these look-alike medications. Well, you can imagine who's going to make a medication or a pill better? Somebody making this stuff up in their dining room table or in their basement, or somebody doing it in a pharmaceutical lab? So one of the big problems that we have with all of these counterfeit pills right now that have flooded the streets and flooded our drug markets is visually there's no way for the user to tell the difference. There's no way for law enforcement to tell the difference. And as we saw from the pharmacist, it takes only a couple of grains of sand worth of fentanyl to be a fatal lethal dose. And when you're making these things in a clandestine way, it's kind of like when your 5-year-old helps you make your chocolate chip cookies. You end up with one piece of your chocolate chip cookie that's all chocolate chips. It may as well just be a big glob of chocolate chips. And then you end up with a couple other cookies that have like no chocolate chips in them. It's just all dough. Well, the same thing happens with these individuals that are making these clandestine pills. They don't have an even distribution of their fentanyl substitute that they're putting into these, so you end up with some pills that are just all filler materials, and then you have other pills that are extremely potent, so much so that they're lethal. And the end user on the street who's trying to feed their habit, or maybe they're just trying to get high or have fun for the night, they don't know the difference. So they're literally playing a game of Russian roulette. Now, last fall, the CDC put a warning out to folks that roughly 40% of the pharmaceutical tablets available through alternative means, basically your street-level dealers, are counterfeit and likely contain fentanyl. Kind of moving along because I want to be respectful of the other folks' time. Just kind of keep in mind what we see on the streets. Now, my unit, we are responsible for everything from white-collar investigations of, in the old, just a few years ago, of doctors that were over-prescribing or were maybe in cahoots and selling scripts and things like that. We do a lot of undercover work where we're actually working and on the streets in plainclothes and undercover capacities doing drug buys from drug dealers. Now, what we see here in Washington County is, thankfully, we don't have very many dealers that have set up shop here in Washington County. Most of our dealers are transient dealers. The vast majority are coming from the Milwaukee area. The vast majority of our drug users travel to Milwaukee on a daily, sometimes multiple times a day basis to go to Milwaukee to source either their heroin or their pills. Now, the evil thing about an opiate addiction is the longer you use it, the more you need, and the more expensive it becomes. And I'm sure many people in this room have been affected by somebody that has a narcotic analgesic addiction, which is, what brought your interest to come out tonight. And you've probably seen firsthand that, first it's like, some of the prized possessions start disappearing, or, they're selling stuff to the friends, or they're, selling stuff online, and then all of a sudden dad can't find his new power tools, and then all of a sudden mom's missing jewelry, and all of a sudden money's missing out of their wallet. These are all things that we see and we hear literally every day from people that are affected by that narcotic analgesic abuse right here in Washington County. Some of the street level sales that we're seeing, and again, something to keep in mind, most of the Percocet pills and the oxycodone pills that are on the street right now are counterfeit, and most of them contain varying levels of fentanyl. The patches, we used to see a lot of patches, but the healthcare industry, the nursing homes, the hospitals, the hospice centers, they've really stepped up their game, and even in their disposal procedures have tightened things up, so it's a lot harder for people to get a hold of the patches. Although, as some of my friends in the health department can attest to, whenever we do these drug take-back days, I'm always surprised by the number of cartons of fentanyl patches that get turned in by family members, usually by somebody who is a survivor of a family member that passed on and had fentanyl while they were under hospice care. One heroin bindle, $10 to $20, and that might get them, for some people, that might be all they need to get them through the day, so their habit, the street-level heroin or the street-level fentanyl is much cheaper, much easier to come by. So it becomes a rule of economics. If they have, rather than spending $160 a day for a couple of pills of oxycodone or what they think are oxycodone, it becomes a lot cheaper just to buy the heroin or the fentanyl on the street. There was a question in the last session about what are the methods of ingestion. And I would tell you, use your imagination and everything in between. It can be smoked, it can be vaporized, it can be snorted, it can be rectally absorbed, it can be orally absorbed, it can be injected. So the method of ingestion, there isn't any one specific type. It's however that person wants to use it, however fast they want to get it into their bloodstream. I've spent a lot of time, interviewing people that were in the throes of addiction, and when they first started out, they said, well, I'm not an addict because I'm only going to snort it. And then it's, well, I'm not an addict, I'm only going to inhale it by essentially vaporizing it. They'll place the product on a piece of tin foil or some other type metallic object, heat it up, and inhale the vapors. And then when that wasn't enough, they would just have to increase the amount that they were using. And then when that still wasn't enough, then they might start playing around with injecting. And usually once a person's addiction gets to the point that they are injecting, it is immensely difficult to get that person back off. They're pretty much on a highway to disaster at that point, because at that point their addiction is so powerful that they need to get that substance into their body as fast as possible. I've interviewed addicts that intravenously injecting, through the veins and things in their arms and their hands and their toes and their legs was no longer sufficient. They knew that they were probably months away from an overdose, and the only way that they could get that product in fast enough is they were actually doing arterial injections. So it gets to be very, 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 very scary. And then ultimately, where does this lead us to? I apologize, when my computer went to sleep, it just never came back up right. Well, what you were going to hear was a 911 call transcript from right here in our local area. And it starts out, the dispatcher says, 911, what's your emergency? The parent, I need an ambulance to my home. Okay, and what's going on there? I went to wake up my daughter, and she it doesn't look like she's breathing. She's got fluids coming out of her mouth. She's blue. She's got blue lips. Okay. She's blue all over. Okay. Hold on. This is an actual call transcript from our area here in the Ozaki, Washington area. And ultimately, this is what happens. So in 2015, here in Washington County, we recorded 12 overdose deaths. Now, most of those were related to oxycodone and other opiates. 2016, we went to 18. 2017, we went to 24. 2018, 21. I believe it was in 2018 when we started to first start to see fentanyl. And by 2019, we were seeing a decrease. There was a huge push during 18 and 19. There was some, we started to see our needle exchanges and things. We're issuing Narcan to our frequent users. And so there were a lot of user-to-user Narcan saves and preventing overdoses. And then as you can see, we've really been off to the races. In 2020, back to 19 deaths, 2021, 36 deaths. Now, the asterisks next to 21 and 22, the reason those asterisks are there is because we're still awaiting toxicology in some of those cases. Toxicology takes a long time, and then when we have to get confirming toxicology, that, you know, it's not unusual for these things to stay open for 9 months, a year, or longer. And then in 22, we had 35 deaths. Now, I said we started to see the impact of fentanyl at about the 2019 region. By 2021, the vast majority of our drug overdose deaths are fentanyl. Same holds true in 22. And so far, year to date, it's February 2nd today, I have 3 overdose deaths on my desk, and all 3 of those are fentanyl. So, you know, when you're here in Washington County, you know, to put this into perspective, on average on our highways, we have about 10 to 15 fatal motor vehicle crashes in a year. And you can see we're blowing those numbers right out of the water in overdose cases. And this is quite a sobering reality, because a lot of people don't want to think about that. They don't want to think that, you know, there were 35 deaths in their greater community related to drugs, related to drug addiction, related to drug use, illicit use. You know, it's staggering. I think if we, as a society, we're willing to spend, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to rebuild a traffic intersection when we have 1 or 2 fatalities, but yet to get more resources in an area where we are experiencing 35, 36, potentially more, it's only, you know, we haven't hit that plateau yet. Deaths in a single year, it's difficult. So that kind of graphic kind of speaks for itself. So fentanyl in the law. Fentanyl is defined as a Schedule II controlled substance here in Wisconsin. Simple possession of fentanyl is a felony offense, punishable by up to 3.5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. And distribution or possession with intent can land you up to 40 years incarcerated and a $100,000 fine. My group, my team, we do fentanyl cases quite regularly, quite routinely. It's a little difficult to chase down all of the statistics on that, because most of that activity and most of those arrests are getting charged out in other counties, because, you know, we don't necessarily have guys that have set up shop and are actually doing the delivering and the drug dealing right here. So oftentimes, you know, we're traveling out of the county to meet with the dealers and to make those cases. But it is here, and as that last graphic showed, it's met with quite quite a deadly consequence. Any questions? I see the hands picking up, so.
I don't know if fentanyl is more expensive than heroin, but wouldn't it be beneficial to for the dealer to say, hey, this is cut with fentanyl to get more money for the product, and then also the person buying it would know there's fentanyl in there?
Sometimes the dealer knows that they have a very potent product. Oftentimes they do not. And what we have learned in our interviews with our local users, and it sounds very, very crass, but they actually seek out the more potent stuff. And so oftentimes they just don't know.
I saw on one of your slides, it mentioned the dark web. Can you
Yes.
talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The dark web, a part of the internet that probably most folks in here aren't familiar with. You know, what we see when we fire up our, well, we used to call it Internet Explorer or Safari if you're a Mac user. What we see through our normal search engines literally is only a very, very small amount of what is actually out there on the internet, you know, and for good reason. Oftentimes with the dark web, you know, some things to look for, you know, at home would be if, you know, someone has what's called a Tor browser or the Onion router. And when they have those types of things, the whole purpose of that is to anonymize even, you know, to a very high degree what their activities are on the internet. The dark web, you know, it's just like going to Google Marketplace, and you can pick and choose whatever you want to buy. You can, you know, if you want, you know, heroin, if you want cocaine, if you want whatever drug of your choice, they will figure out a way to ship it to you. And you utilize cryptocurrencies. You don't use credit cards. You use Bitcoin, Ethereum, you know, is just kind of an example. So it's a completely different part of the internet. And you have to ask yourself, okay, why does my loved one, you know, and why are they utilizing this instead of the normal internet? It's not just because, you know, they don't want to have, you know, advertising cookies on their computer. There's something a lot more nefarious going on.
Hello.
Hello.
You said that there are 3 overdoses already for January.
Correct.
I was just wondering what parts of Washington County, and is there a certain area of Washington County where you're primarily having these issues, or is it scattered?
Unfortunately, as anyone that works in addiction will tell you, it goes across the entire spectrum. Addiction doesn't matter if you grew up on a farm or if you're in a city. It doesn't matter what socioeconomic class you are. It doesn't matter what race, religion, or creed you are. It is really affecting us countywide.
So I noticed that a lot of your statistics of deaths were higher during pandemic time. What have you noticed being different in trends during the pandemic?
For us and my group, obviously the drug dealers did not listen to the stay-at-home orders. I know that's shocking. However, various branches and various arms of law enforcement were required to. So there was a significant amount of fewer enforcement actions that were taken. Investigations were shelved. And so there was certainly an uptick in some of that undercurrent and some of that activity. However, the deaths aren't necessarily related to that. What the deaths, my opinion, my 2 cents, has basically been because of the fentanyl. We went from people that were very tolerant to their Percocet, their oxycodones, their Vicodins, their codeines, and then suddenly you know, all it would take would be, you know, half of one of these counterfeit produced pills, and if they were unlucky to have the chocolate chip cookie that just had all of the chocolate, that was it.
My brother-in-law had talked, he had gotten some training about going into sites and having to keep their gas masks on because of the just exposure in the air. He wouldn't explain any more than that, but when is that situation something that we might face or our kids might face?
So sure, a lot of times when we're talking about the clandestine production of some of these drugs, especially if it's an area where somebody has a pill press, or if it's in an area where somebody is adding some type of a cutting agent or a diluent or an adulterant to a drug supply, it's oftentimes going to be in a powdered form. And as you can imagine, these materials are ground to a consistency finer than talcum powder, so it doesn't take a lot of bumping or moving into things to end up with that dust cloud, if you will, to get into the air. And so that's why in some of these cases, yeah, we do have to mask up. And it isn't just something that happens far away. We've had recently we had an officer that had a exposure investigating a overdose death. So it happens right here.
So what do you do if you come across what you suspect to be fentanyl? Do you not touch it? Do you put gloves on? What do you do with it? How do you dispose it? Because if there's a chance that we could come across it, and does it absorb right through your skin? And can you die from that?
So I have to be a little bit careful about how I answer that, because I can't say this is what me as a representative of the sheriff's office say how you should handle that. The way that I would answer that is the way that I would handle that, and the way that we do handle it in our investigations. Yes, glove up. Depending on the circumstances, you may be wearing a mask. We may be going with a full respirator while we deal with that. Generally speaking, once we get that substance wet, it's going to mitigate the tendency for it to get airborne, and then it just becomes a matter of cleaning it up as we would anything else. But we don't just sweep it off and throw it in the trash. We actually then would collect that, bag it. We actually double bag it, double seal it, properly mark it, and so forth. And it ultimately, for us to dispose of it, we have to incinerate it. So again, not giving you professional advice, but right. Ideally, yeah.
Other questions?
So it seems like when you talk about a dark web, these folks are kind of smart, right? So, they know to use Narcan. So if the information is out there that this stuff is cut with fentanyl and fentanyl can kill you, or in your example when you said chocolate chip, no chocolate chip. So we're saying we're just taking a chance.
Yeah. Every time a user uses heroin, uses an opiate, uses an opiate pill, absolutely. They're taking a chance, just like Russian roulette. And how successful can a person be for how long? The insidious thing especially about a narcotic analgesic addiction is you can have a very high tolerance, you can be lucky for a long time, and it just takes that one time where you have too much. You just have that one time where then all of those other psychophysical things come into effect. You can't control it as an end user. Once you have too much in your system, you're kind of you're way behind the curve.
Yeah.
Once that respiratory distress starts, it's.
So if one day I said, hey, I'm feeling bad, I'm gonna go on the dark web and get some stuff, and if I know that, right? The information's out there. Right? It's out there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of I'm going to get some stuff.
Sure. No, I get what you're saying. You know, you've made that choice. The downside is what happens to people after they make that choice? Do they get in a car and drive around town all high? Do they, you know, get in and create other kinds of family problems? I mean, you know, an individual choice, you know, that's on you as the individual, but a lot of times those personal choices bleed over into other areas.
Okay, we got time for a couple more questions.
Hello, thank you. Are you finding in Washington County fentanyl in other substances? I know you talk about the pills, but are you finding it in marijuana? Are you finding it in cocaine and meth? Because I know that does happen.
Yeah, it does. You're absolutely correct on that. That's a whole other segue, but yes, we see fentanyl in our cocaine supply. Yes, we see fentanyl in our methamphetamine supply. As far as meth in our marijuana, it's been reported to us by users that they've had that experience. However, marijuana is not generally something that I send off to an analytical lab for that level of analysis. So I can't answer that.
You've talked a lot about the addicts, the users. What about the kids? What about in the schools? What's the level there? How are they getting it? How prevalent is it? How easy is it for them to get a hold of these things?
Well, if you think about how easy is it for them to get a pill? How easy is it for them to be exposed to their friend who maybe has a diagnosis of ADHD and is prescribed Adderall, and you know they're trading pills with their friend? Sure, it's there. Now, personally, I can't say that we've seen fentanyl in our high school. I can say that we've seen other drugs in our high schools, and knowing what we know about our drug supply, I suspect that there may start to be more of that. I also know that you know, one of my 3 deaths across my desk, not a high school student, but I believe that individual was quite young, probably only a year or so out of high school. You know, so we have, it's certainly possible.
Right. I've got one last question. So you said 35 deaths in Washington County. So that was occurred in Washington County or Washington County residents?
Good question. Those were deaths that occurred in Washington County.
So not Ozaki, just Washington.
Just Washington. And those were deaths that occurred here. Now, most of those overdose deaths were residents. I can't say that every one of them was, but off the top of my head, I don't remember any of those being transitory.
Okay, so, and you said 35 or 36, that's about 3 times as many traffic fatalities.
Correct.
Okay, just a show of hands, how many people were surprised by that number? Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Killey. Let's give him a hand. So the last presentation tonight, when we were putting this series together, it all sounds so dismal, and we wanted to end every night with some message of hope. So our final presenters are Aaron and Rick Rockwell, and they're going to tell the story of their son, and then they're going to leave us with a message of hope.
So my name is Aaron, and this is my husband, Rick. We are parents of Logan, who is gone, and he was 19. He passed away last year, or 2 years ago, actually. I'm sorry, I'm so used to saying last year now with the new year. He passed away on Valentine's Day 2021. So we're here just to kind of give you a story, just what we've tried to do with his death and what we've gone through. And so I guess we'll start with that. So Logan was, you know, he was 19 when he passed. We had some struggles with him. We're going to go through sort of that story. Rick's going to just kind of read our mission statement. We started a foundation almost a year ago after just really discovering just the need and the necessity to speak to this crisis, because there's so many kids who do not know about fentanyl And like the officer said, like there's just, it's all over. And Logan did not know the night that he died that he took a pill. He didn't intend to die. He took a blue 30 milligram, what he thought was an oxycodone Percocet pill, and it ended up being 3 different forms of fentanyl. So I'm going to let Rick read our mission statement, and then we'll kind of move forward.
Yeah, as Aaron mentioned, because of there's such a stigma with this issue, and there's so much that people don't know. We still run into people that don't know what fentanyl is, and it's something that everybody needs to know. So our mission is to save lives through increased support and education in the community, to end the stigma associated with mental health and drug addiction, and to raise awareness of the dangers of fentanyl and other illicit drugs.
So I wanted to start out by just talking about our family. Part of the whole point to this is just to kind of hit everybody and let everyone know that this can happen to anybody. This is not a discriminatory issue. It is hitting every age group, every class, every area. And, there's such a stigma with drug-related deaths. And I think one of the things that we really want to focus on, and that we are focusing on, is just showing people that, like, Logan came from a good home. He was taught so many great things. If you look back at our logo, because he died on Valentine's Day, that heart there in the middle is actually his artwork and his signature. And our message really to everybody is just, wanting to speak to the heart. We believe that showing his face and showing our story can hit the heart of people, and that's really the most critical thing. He grew up, in a really loving home. We had great times together. We did a lot with our kids. We went camping. Just some pictures of just some of the fun things that we used to do. We did just lots of things. Logan loved animals. We would go fishing. We went on trips. We taught our kids about faith. We took them to church and youth group and just did so many things with them as they were young. As you can see, he has a brother named Caden. His brother was 14 months younger. So Caden is now 19. Logan would have been 21 today. And just gives you kind of, I guess, just kind of a little bit of the background on, the things that we did, which I think as parents, many people do with their kids. You try to just do the best that you can. So that, yeah, I guess that was one big, and here's another, just another picture, some more descriptions. Logan loved baseball. He just loved to do fun, adventurous things. He loved cats. We did a lot of really fun things for birthdays. I was a big birthday person, still am, and always had big birthday parties for him. And just the normal American family, I guess. Not perfect family at all. Of course, there's no perfect family, but as Logan was probably around 4th, 5th grade, we did start to notice that he was dealing with some anxiety. He was dealing with just stressors at school. If anyone here, I'm sure, are parents, when your kids are struggling, you have that intuition button, right? That you're like, something just seems off. And so we did start getting help when he was in 4th or 5th grade. He went through a pretty significant death in our family that he struggled with. So we did reach out right away for help. As they were young, he was just extremely close with his brother. They did a lot of things together. We'd often get asked if they were twins because they were very close in age. The big picture on the right there is Caden's absolute favorite picture of them, so I use it in our presentations. So as a young kid, he was happy. Things seemed pretty good. He did, though, start to show some signs of vulnerability and anxiety around that age that I talked about. He was kind of that kid who would come home from a sleepover in the middle of the night because he was feeling left out or teased, or he would be the one that would just feel just sad. He just really wrestled. So I'm actually a licensed clinical therapist in Wisconsin. I have a private practice, and I say that because I was so in tune with what was going on with him, so I was seeking help very early on. Like, we were really on top of that with him. So, this is like many, many attempts to help, a kid that, like I said, at a young age, he started to struggle. And I show these pictures because I think it shows the smile, and as the years go on in pictures, you can actually see the anxiety increasing. And I know there's so many kids out there right now that are struggling. COVID hit, on top of COVID. These kids, I think someone asked a question about how accessible are pills at school. My answer to that in every area that we talk in is extremely accessible.
If they have one of these, they can get a pill.
Yeah. There are times where we'll be talking and I'll say to Rick, or we'll talk and I'll say, phones are great, right? But they have changed our world. And they're really good for a lot of things, but they can be really bad for a lot of things. And kids can access anything online. And 20, 30 years ago, that was not the case. So the times have really changed. And so kids can access things on Snapchat, on TikTok. They can order a pill and have it delivered to their house, I see 13, 14, 15-year-olds across the nation dying because they ordered a pill and it was delivered within 10 minutes and the parents find them in the bedroom. So it is extremely accessible. So I just wanted to make sure I spoke to that. So this is sort of the, what's it?
And to follow up with that too, with social media, in today's environment, there is so much. Everybody hides behind their computer screen. I shouldn't say everybody, but there's people hide behind their computer screen, and they will make their opinion loud, and it creates so much of the anxiety these kids feel. It doesn't matter whether they're a soft, vulnerable kid. I believe that every kid feels this at some point. They're just people. It's just the environment we live in. If they don't agree with you, they are going to make it known, and they're going to bash you, and they're going to just, make you feel this big, and they can hide behind their screen, and unfortunately, that's what we're having to deal with too.
Absolutely. So this is just a great example of the anxiety that we saw at a young age. You can see Logan in the blue coat, scared to cross a bridge, and his brother's cheering him on. So this is, I was standing back taking the picture, but it's just a good, example of, a mom who had intuition, and I just knew he was struggling. At that point in our life, if somebody would have told me our son was going to die of drugs, I would have thought they were crazy. I would have said, no, wait, not my kid. It just wasn't in our, wasn't in our toolkit. It was not, even as a therapist, it was just absolutely not. I sort of had that opinion of that would be a druggy thing, and that wouldn't be our family because he's not exposed to that. And that's our biggest message, and we'll continue on into that. But you just can't ever say it's not going to be my kid. It's just it's the times have just changed. He was very worried about fitting in. He was getting some bullying at school and would come home with tears. And so we were talking to schools. We moved our house for him to try to give him a new, fresh start. He was, very kind to others. We did seek counseling right away. Logan didn't like standing out. Everything really pretty much created anxiety for him. We would go to family's house for Christmas, and he would be scared to even go in the door to our family's house, and he'd be fine once he got in. He was just that vulnerable kid. So as the teen years started, he was a big baseball player, loved to play baseball. He was playing select. He did great. We got him a ton of extra help with baseball to give him confidence. Cal Ripken camp, out of state. We did everything to help that kid. And just, we would see him succeed, and he felt so good. So we thought things were going pretty well. And so, obviously the ending was tragic, but, his anxiety increased. I think peer pressure increased. A lot of times people say, kids get into drugs because they've had some trauma. And my answer to that as a therapist and also as a mom, as I've seen, what's happened in Logan's life and put these puzzle pieces together, is that a lot of kids, if not most nowadays, with the pressure, go through many, many traumas. Just a school issue can cause a kid a trauma. And it doesn't have to be a big, like, abusive, incident or something like that. There's kids nowadays with social media and pressures, and they're going through many traumas all the time. And in Logan's case, as we've put puzzle pieces together, we just feel like it was a series of little things happening as he was growing up, and he became so obsessed and focused on wanting to fit in and find the group of friends who would accept him. And he found a group that would accept him, but it was a group that was pulling him into vaping, which is where things started, and then some alcohol experimentation, and then it moved to marijuana and so forth. We knew some of these things were going on in our house. He also had a surgery at the age of 14, and the doctor gave him oxycodone as a prescription for his pain. We would obviously, now that we know what we know, handle that very different. But about 3 days into the surgery, post-surgery, we looked at each other and we could see he was high in the recliner. And we had a private conversation and said, we have to get that away. We got him off of that. We put him on ibuprofen and Tylenol. And then kind of went on with things, not realizing that at that point, this is what we believe now, that is what started him experimenting with pills. And so from that point, we knew things were going on, but we didn't really know how serious it was. The confident part of me as a mom thought, well, I'm a therapist and I know what's going on. And I did know, things were happening because we were getting him help. We went to Rogers, we were at Aurora, we were out of state. So we were really trying to get him help because there was definitely some turmoil going on in the home. If anybody in here has ever dealt with, which I'm assuming there's got to be, addiction of any kind in a home, whether it's, a parent or a sibling or a family member or a friend, it affects everybody in the home. Our home was not, it had become increasingly stressful. He had been kind of changing. His personality was changing. He was getting more bold with us, which was very not typical. So we were noticing personality changes, and our stress was increasing. It was causing stress between the two of us. So there was a lot going on, and we're really not shy about that. The reason is because I believe there's so many families out there who are dealing with this, and they can't get help because it's a shameful feeling. You feel like, well, what did I do wrong as a parent? What's going on? And you don't know where to turn. There's not a lot of help for a family like us that we went through. Like, there's really, you can find a counselor, but if it's someone who doesn't understand, we were feeling pretty lonely.
Yeah, and that's why like I mentioned in our mission statement, that's why we're up here. We want to be talking. We want the communities to be talking. We want parents to be talking, because it is a very lonely time, and you don't know where to turn if you feel shamed. You don't know what to do, and you need the place to turn to. You need the people to talk to. You need to be talking about this, because this issue's not going away.
No. So just to kind of bring you up to almost present day, 2 years ago, Logan went off to college. He graduated from high school. He graduated from Pewaukee High School. We had moved to Pewaukee, and started at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Some of you might have heard the story. It has been in the news. Logan passed away. We received a phone call. It was Valentine's Day at 8:37 p.m. This was right in the middle of COVID, and we had been, for the prior, backing up just for a second, we had been really trying to repair a relationship with him as he became, this freshman in college. We, furnished his dorm. He was coming home for laundry and dinners. That picture over on the right there of him holding Pete, that was one of his, weekends coming home. You can probably see a visual change, though, from the left-hand picture. Obviously, he's a little older, but he definitely visually started to look a little different. But we felt pretty good. Like Caden, his brother, was going down to UWM, and they were hanging out, and so things seemed to be going well, better than they had been for the prior 2 years. So we were feeling positive. We knew he was smoking marijuana, but at that point, since he was out of our house, we sort of just said, what can we do about it? There's not much you can do when you have a kid out of your house. He's 19, so we weren't going to sacrifice our relationship over it. So we sort of, I wouldn't say accepted it, but he knew he couldn't do it in our house. But we weren't going to make it the breaking point of like not, having this relationship with him. So things had been going pretty well. Valentine's Day, we were just on the couch watching TV. It was about 8:37. And I received a phone call from a friend of his, and I knew as soon as that person's name came up on my ID, something was wrong. And it was his best friend, and he had said, Mrs. Rockwell, call UWM police. And, I just said, why? Like, what's going on? And he's like, just call, I don't know. So as I was talking to him, Rick got on the phone, tried calling the police department several times. We could not get an actual person on the phone. So we had called my dad in the meantime, who used to be a police officer for many years, and he said, Aaron, just get Caden and you guys need to go down to the campus. So that's what we did. We drove down to the campus, and as we were driving on the way down to the campus, I had a really good friend, call me on our way. I think we were right around like Miller Park on 94, and she said, Aaron, what's going on? And I'm like, well, like, how do you know? Social media, it had already hit social media. She said there's stuff all over the internet saying like Logan overdosed, and I'm like, what? So it was at that point I knew he was gone, and we've talked about this since. Like Rick still had that hope that like maybe he was just going to be in the hospital. So we got to the campus, and as we got in there, our other son, he almost collapsed in the hallway, just shaking before we even found out. We ended up finding out that Logan had been on FaceTime with his girlfriend, 3-month, they were together about 3 months. We didn't even know her, for about 5 hours, around 2:30 a.m. till about 7:30 a.m. with Valentine's morning. And she had said that he was very distraught and they were fighting. And he had taken a pill, he didn't feel well, and he wasn't making sense. These are the things we had found out afterwards, after talking with her the next day. And within about 5-10 minutes, he started falling asleep and snoring. And that, to me, is one of the biggest reasons why, one of the biggest reasons why we decided to start talking about this, because those are all signs of someone overdosing. Snoring is huge. It's your airways shutting down, and Logan didn't snore typically anyway. But knowing someone's distraught, knowing they've taken something, knowing they don't feel good, combine all those symptoms. And she hung up the phone thinking he was falling asleep. If she would have known, she could have called the police department, which was right downstairs from his dorm room. He lived on the 11th floor of Sandberg Hall, and the police department was right downstairs.
Yeah, and they were outfitted with Narcan, so they would have been able to administer it.
Yeah. That is like one of the biggest compelling parts of our story, just because we didn't know as parents, to put fentanyl education in our toolkits as parents. She didn't know, and he didn't know. And that's why we're talking.
Yeah. And another point too, he didn't know. He would tell us, we'd say be careful, and he said he knew what he was doing. He knew where he was getting his stuff from. You can't assume that you can't assume that at all. No matter where you get it from, like was said before, it's like Russian roulette.
There's no such thing anymore of saying be careful with any drug use. Be careful. What is that? How do you know? You don't. So there's no such thing. It's either you don't do it or you do, and if you do, you are risking a life. So this is the main reason we decided to step out and educate, to tell our transparent story. Obviously, not pleasant pictures, but very difficult. But if we can save one, that's our mission. So as we started to develop the Love Logan Foundation just this last year, very new, I was finding other parents in Wisconsin who are going through the same thing. So I've reached out to, several hundred now, but like in Wisconsin, we found a whole bunch of families, and I gathered, mostly from most moms, the pictures and stories and so forth, and we did get a billboard put up after raising some money. So that's what started in June, July, after we came home from the DEA summit in June. So this is our first billboard. It was the Wisconsin Faces Gone Too Soon. We're working on another one right now, but this board is right now, it's currently up, well, it was up initially in Waukesha, Milwaukee County. The new board is now up in Brown County, Kenosha, one in Indiana, Middleton, Madison, and like I said, we have a new design coming that's going to be off I-94 near Oconomowoc, Sullivan area. As you can see, very normal kids, just, all of them fentanyl. And we could fill several boards from Wisconsin. There are hundreds. This is just a very small representation of some of the kids that have passed. This is just another shot of the other version of the board. We also gave each parent a chance to have their own billboard of their own kid. There's something about when you lose a child feeling really good that their face could be possibly saving another, and we want the conversations to start. So each parent on the main billboard did get their own board. We kind of surprised the parents with that. This picture here was taken in the summer when our son was home from college. Obviously, it's the three of us looking up at Logan. It's something we really don't want to see any other family have this. Pretty much pictures is all we really have left. Some of the other projects we've done, New York, we were able to get into the Times Square, right where the ball drops, for 6 months. That project was a godsend given thing. I have no idea how that happened. I was seen on Fox News, and Fox News aired one of our segments, and then the New York media company contacted us, and we were able to get a really cool billboard up there in Times Square, which drew a lot of media attention. Again, just trying to keep that word flowing. We've done a lot of work with the DEA, have a great relationship with the Wisconsin DEA head gentleman, and then we're also working on some legislation. I'm not sure how many of you know, but I know there's going to be some Narcan stuff next week. But Narcan is huge. If Narcan would have been available and if the kids would have known the signs, Logan likely would have been here. We'll never know that, but it's so important to us that we start working on Narcan getting mandated in schools and in colleges and universities. We have been able to work with the UW system, and all but one University of Wisconsin system school will have Narcan stations all over the campus. The Milwaukee campus where Logan passed pushed back a little bit on us, but we kept pushing and saying, you've got to get it all around campus. These kids need to have access to it. It's not going to increase drug use. It's going to save lives. They now have 22 stations around campus. Oshkosh has it. There's one school that's resisting it a little bit, and we're going to keep working on them. So that's another piece of the thing we're working on, is the legislation piece of it. Just some other news things. The biggest thing about news, the reason why we have it up here is because honestly, news and things like this are the platforms we have been given to get the word out. Without news and without, the college here holding things like this, it's very hard to get to a whole bunch of people. So the media has been amazing. and just really being supportive behind, our cause and our mission.
Yeah, we wish there was an urgency like with COVID, with the fentanyl, because there's so many deaths a day. How many there's?
Yeah, it's close to 300 fentanyl deaths, overdose deaths a day, and about 70% of those are fentanyl related. And in one of these, actually it's the one I think down here, these are all on our website, so if anyone goes to our website, they're all on there. But the one on the lower left corner, that's actually one of the things I said in that interview, is that it's about a plane crash a day. And if there was a plane crash, it would be all over the news immediately. But because of the stigma with drugs, we are, our society just does not give it the attention it needs. But again, 30 years ago, very different. Nowadays, we've got, kids who are very desensitized to pills, right? Like, we all have pills in our house. We had pills in our house, and Tylenol, Advil, antidepressants, anxiety meds, allergy medications. So, if a kid is at school and says, "Here, take this," anxious kid, takes a pill. Now, if they were being handed a bag of powder and a needle, it might be a little scarier. But pills are not scary right now to kids. And that's sort of what happened to Logan. He was not injecting that we know of or using heroin in his arm. He was using pills and got a bad pill. This is part of just the UW system that we've been able to kind of, we talked about already, the UWM, Oshkosh. The poster in the middle is a UWM poster they have up on campus. And then the newest program we're working is we've partnered with Waukesha County on their Instagram and Facebook. They're pushing out some great, very personal and get to the heart messages. The very right-hand side is a bus wrap that they're putting in the county there. So we're hoping that we can continue to work with counties and get those things up, get them visible to people who need to hear the message. So just a few things that we want you guys to all kind of take away from this is that pills are normalized, like we talked about. And so starting the conversation with family members and kids and just, people knowing that, there's fake pills. They look exactly the same, like you guys heard earlier. Kids are at very high risk because they don't know. The younger population, the statistics are growing with younger kids. They don't even have time to get an addiction because a lot of them are dying so quickly because they get the wrong pill. And that is a problem. So educating early is really important. I tell parents, even at third grade, young kids, when do we teach kids to not cross the street without looking both ways, right? Really early on. That is when we start teaching kids. You are empowered to know what you're putting in your body, what you see, what your eyes see, what you hear, music. So empowering kids at a young age and then kind of tailoring it up, as they get older. As far as like pills, you don't take anything, not even an Advil, from anyone other than from this house, ever. That's the message. Narcan, that'll be talked about next week, but it's crucial to have in community buildings everywhere. And I think, it's just, if you don't know how it works, next week's going to be great.
Right,
So.
and I want to mention something about the Narcan too. So there's pushback. Some people say, well, you are promoting drug use when you put Narcan out there, but the one thing is dead people can't recover. Kids kids make mistakes, so.
We always say we never condone Logan taking the medication, ever, and he was not allowed in our house to do those things. But kids are going to make mistakes, right? And they should be able to get back up and learn. And we need to teach them that there are situations where that's not going to be the case. Big one for us, poisoning versus overdose. A lot of people use the word overdose. Yes, technically you can continue to use that word, but we're really specific on poisoning versus the overdose because it helps reduce stigma. Poisoning is when you actually get something and you're taking it and you're taking the recommended dose, but you're not getting what you thought you got. So
one pill.
Yeah.
Doctor can prescribe you a medication and you take one pill and you don't expect to die from that. So if there's something that's adulterated in that pill and it kills you, that's why we call it a poisoning. An overdose would be you have one pill, you know what it is, and you take several of them, like you take 20, whatever it is, whatever number, that's an overdose.
And with fentanyl, that's why, we're really, firm on that. Like the fentanyl being, put into a pill or binded with other powders or substances, that is a poisoning because people they don't know. These young kids don't know. And, just to kind of leave you with, like, ask your schools, ask your colleges, ask people, workplaces. We're talking a workplace next week. Ask what they're doing about, Narcan and education. I mean, the more the community gets involved and asks and puts some heat on schools and so forth, that's how we're going to, have change happen. We need an army of people to continue to speak out about it. That's really, really important. So, takeaway is just never say, not my child. It could be anybody. It's still a shock. On our way here tonight, Rick just said at a stoplight, like, I can't believe, like, this is actually happening. And I'm like, I know. Like, you just go through shock. It's just you just don't think it's going to be you. So if you need any more information or have questions, please do not hesitate. We have a QR code you can scan. That'll take you right to our website. And we have pamphlets at the table out there answering a lot of questions. Obviously, if there's any way anyone ever wants to support our cause, you can certainly donate on our webpage. You can speak to us for whatever reason. We're always here. And so we just want to thank, everybody else involved tonight, and certainly the college for putting this on and just making this such a big thing, what it should be. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick and Aaron. Are you guys going to stick around a little bit in the back to answer? Okay. So we are past 7:30, so Rick and Aaron will be in the back if you have some questions for them. Adam is going to get the post-test up, so like I said, this is a series to educate people, so we got a gauge of where you're at before, and now we're going to see where you're at later, so if you could take the time to fill that out. Next week, we're back here 6 to 7:30 Thursday night. Overdoses, the how and the why. The West Bend Fire Department is going to do a presentation, Aurora Healthcare, and then Jessica Geschke is going to be our word of hope that night. So thank you very much for attending, and hopefully we'll see you next Thursday.